And we're live to discuss an episode of Homicide Life on the Street with his Jeffness. So over to Jeff whilst I bring up the images, and I'll try to have them automatically change as a slideshow.
Cool. Okay, so we are up to Season 6, Episode 9, which is entitled Closet Cases. It was written by Christopher Kyle, James Yoshimura, and Julie Martin, and directed by Leslie Libman and Larry Williams. I believe the last time that they directed an episode together, we brought up the subject of why did they have two directors, but I still don't know. But apparently they are a team as directors rather than just splitting duties, because this isn't the first one they've done. So anyway, it originally aired January 2nd, 1998 on NBC, so it was the first episode of 1998. Unlike some past years, we didn't have any. We had mention of it being New Year's, but they didn't show the board, so we didn't see the fresh board like we have on a couple other previous ones. So, in fact, they never actually officially show whether the main case in this episode, whether Bayliss was the primary or Pembleton. I kind of got the idea that Bayliss was, but they never actually showed that or said it at any point. So, anyway. Here is what David B226 Morris had to say about this episode on May 29th, 2006. The lives of the characters on Homicide took all kinds of twists and turns over the series' 7-year run. This one's a little rough on the grammar. The one that had caused the biggest uproar began with a central story in Closet Cases. The reason it invoked the uproar was not only because of the controversy of the subject, but because it involved Homicide's erstwhile center, Tim Bayliss. The story begins with the severe beating of a homosexual man in the dumpster behind a gay bar. Bayliss and Pembleton are called in. This isn't the first gay-bashing episode the series has explored. Recall Season 4's Hate Crimes, in which Bayliss seemed almost homophobic in his attitude towards the victim. Now, we know Bayliss has explored his sexuality in some strange ways. He visiting strip clubs in a black leather jacket and a many splendid thing, and his relationship with the morbid Emma Zool. But none of this brought him anything that could be considered happiness. In addition, by the end of the teaser, he has just ended his 3-week relationship with Juliana Cox. This kind of thing would cause any man to start reflecting on his life. Then Bayliss meets Chris Rawls, the owner of the nightclub where the body was found. Rawls is the antithesis of the typical television portrayal of homosexuals, at least pre-1997. He is literate, subdued, witty, and compassionate, most of which we don't see in a lot of portrayals of gays. When the save is resolved, I'm not sure what the save is, but anyway, maybe it means story. Bayliss decided to have dinner with Rawls, something which is not unprecedented given Tim's history. Frank, however, is floored by this. He has noted that Bayliss has improved in regard to his attitude toward homosexuality in the last couple of years, but that doesn't mean he expected Tim to take a walk on the wild side. And I'm going to skip the next sentence because it's a bit of a spoiler. Okay, most shows would be content to have one character making potentially life-changing decisions in an episode. But lest we forget, Georgia Ray Mahoney is still out on the street, and she appears to have Kellerman by the short hairs. Stivers has been the most conscience-stricken of the 3 detectives, and she pushes for a meeting between the 3 detectives that's about 4 episodes overdue. The meeting between them is very unpleasant, but when it ends, the 3 of them stand united. They will not be blackmailed by Luther's sister. This is the high point in their union, relationship between all 3 detectives. Something. Kellerman confronts Georgia Ray, and in a move that borders on suicidal, calls her bluff, saying that killing her brother is worth his badge. Georgia Ray ponders this, then near the episode's end, sends Mike her response via videotape. On the tape, she admits that the existence of the videotape was a bluff, but that she is now certain. He wrote, now certainly that she killed Luther. No, I don't think she killed Luther. I think what he means is she's now certain that Kellerman killed Luther with malice aforethought, and that she has every intention of wreaking revenge on him. And her revenge will not be as simple as a bullet between the eyes. It's going to be one that will shake the squad to its foundation. Ooh. If all this angst isn't enough, we have Falzone trying to negotiate a better custody agreement of the son with his ex-wife. Unfortunately, Janine is as determined to make sure that he does not change his custody arrangement, making it clear that there will be a long, bitter fight. All this personal tension going on, you'd almost forget there actually been a murder. The beating of Alan Costello leads Bayliss and Pendleton into the gay sections of Baltimore, investigating both the nightclubs and the male hustlers that populate this part of the city. It is eventually revealed that the killer was a prostitute that Costello had tried to help and was repaid by being bludgeoned to death. This prostitute killed him as an apparent denial of his own homosexuality, and he shows disdain not only of his victim but of Bayliss as well. We see both sides of the homosexual fence. The civilized, only slightly ostentatious atmosphere of the gay clubs, as well as the anger and frustration of the community and the general disdain of law enforcement for homosexuals. The murderer was a suspect of a similar killing in San Francisco, but when he was flagged by a Baltimore cop, California refused to extradite him. More telling is the attitude of missing persons in the form of Detective Higbee on another rotation from Homicide, when they learn that the man he's helping look for is a corn muffin. NBC had a lot of problems with this episode, ostensibly because of the relationship between Bayliss and Rawls. However, it seems equally likely that the network was afraid of isolating viewers by showing cops with such homophobic attitudes. This is a controversial issue, and Homicide doesn't run from them. Closet Cases is an interesting episode for many reasons, yet it doesn't register as one of the better episodes of Homicide, though it must have inspired more fan fiction than any other episode of the series. Mainly it's because it tries to do much and is therefore seemed a little overloaded. There's good acting by Secor and Diamond and fine work by Peter Gallagher as Chris Rawls, but ultimately the episode seems somewhat less than the sum of its parts. It's good, but we've come to expect more from Homicide. A lot more. My score, 8. So he sounds like he's dissing it a bit, but he still gave it an 8. So anyway, that's his take. Mr. Ben, what do you have to say?
I give it about a 5. They had some interesting details on sort of like the gay scene, things that are sort of like more well known now. But it's like we've sort of like had episodes like this before. Yes, they've developed. I suppose what makes the episode relevant in its main plot is because of the effect on Tim Bayliss. But I'm starting to get the impression that Bayliss is a bit of a boring character. Even though I do like SJs, I just don't really like them that much as fictional characters.
Morgan agrees with you on that. I don't really think he's a boring character. I didn't necessarily always agree with the choices of the powers that be and what they did with him. But I didn't find him boring most of the time. Annoying sometimes. And other times interesting and thought-provoking, but not usually boring. And I think maybe my perspective has changed when I learned about typology and looked at through the lens. It's like I almost can't be bored by characters if they're written well and consistently. Then I sort of just look at it as, even if I'm not really interested in their particular story, then I sort of look at it as like a case study kind of thing. And I can do that for a brief period of time. I wouldn't watch, some long thing if that's all it was. But I can do it with something that is a good show. I was the same way earlier with Bolander. Even though he wasn't on the show as long as Bayliss, he's a character that, for many reasons, was just a great example of an ISTJ. That you could point out to people that this is somebody who is good at his job, a competent person who shows up to work every day for years. He's got certain things he's good at, certain things he's not. And the dynamic of him and Munch worked really well together, and as a contrast in the way that you explored both of those personalities. So really the strength of Bayliss is his interplay with Pendleton for the most part. And I think the conversations they had in this episode, there was a couple of good ones, but I think maybe weren't quite up to par of some of their conversations in the past. They've had some better ones. But I did kind of like Tim's little monologue about, because I hadn't really thought about that either. Sort of the idea of men in a relationship feeling like there's certain things they don't have to say because they understand because they're both men. That was an interesting concept that I hadn't really thought about before. So,
the bit of the episode that I really did think was substandard was the the foul zone subplot. It's like, also, it wasn't particularly well acted by him. I mean, it wasn't bad acting. It's just not as good as the rest of the cast. Just a notch, not as good as the other ones. Still acceptable, but I just felt the whole storyline was like, oh, I'm bored of this already. This is substandard. This is not particularly interesting.
Since you got Higby on the screen, I always point out I enjoy when they bring back characters they've had before, even in small
Yeah, he went to town on the homophobic names, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, you know, it's maybe a slight cop out that they have characters that they've introduced before that they can kind of be like, instead of having one of the main characters say this, we're going to have this guy because the audience already thinks of him as a jerk. You know, if they'd had Gaffney say the same thing, again, nobody would blink really because they're used to that kind of attitude. Whereas if it was maybe, you know, Kellerman or somebody that said it, you know, there might be a little bit different feeling.
Yeah, there'd be letter writing campaigns.
So I always say that I think it's better when you have an established main character that expresses something that's more controversial, because you kind of force the audience to deal with the reality of it instead of just being, it's easy to write off this character because they're not a regular person. You know?
Well, one of the things about that, though, Jeff, and you probably agree now, is it's easier now for these groups. If you have a character that is a bigoted character, and a particular group feels that they're being got at by this character, they can mobilize a lot of people on social media and contact a lot of like advertisers.
True, but I think it's all on how you handle it. For instance, NYPD Blue, I think, did a good job of they had several homosexual characters over the course of the series, and they weren't just there to be stereotypes. And so you had Sipowicz as a character being, yeah, he's seen as one of the good guys, but they also explored his bigoted attitudes quite a bit and didn't diminish him as a main character. He wasn't just some one-off dude spouting off. You had to deal with the reality of this guy exists, and the relationship he had with especially the character John Irvin, who was the what they call the PAA, sort of the receptionist of the detective squad. You saw their relationship kind of develop over the time on the show. So you had, I think if it's well done, then you're still going to have some off the cuff people who react to anything that they see they don't like on both sides of that. You know, you'll have homosexual groups on something, but you also have like, you know, religious groups that are like saying, oh, you shouldn't even have a homosexual character on a TV show at all. If you have them at all, you're you know, influencing children badly and things like that, you know. So you're always going to have people who have that kind of knee-jerk reaction to whatever it is that pops on the screen that they don't like. But I think anybody who really gives the show a chance, you know, knows that in the case of both of those shows, Homicide and NYPD Blue, that they were trying to be as realistic as possible in the way they portrayed characters. You know, both sides of anything that came up. They wanted to show people's different attitudes and different perspectives, and even some of why they came to those attitudes, you know, some of their backgrounds and things that were discussed or previous experiences. And my immediate thought, of course, you know, is that even though it wasn't brought up in this episode, that there's obviously, since Bayliss revealed he'd been abused as a child, there's always that subtext there. And that, so it was to me a little bit odd that Frank would be as puzzled as he was by Tim's attitude, because it seems like Frank's smart enough and perceptive enough to think, you know, that he's dealing with this abuse his whole life.
Oh, yeah.
And it affects his views on everything, including sexuality especially.
Yeah, especially when it's, you know, it was an abuse by a man.
Right, yeah. And that's obviously, you know, a common thing in terms of men that don't identify themselves as homosexual, but have been sexually abused by men, question their sexuality because of the lingering feelings from that experience. So that's a very common thing. So it's not at all surprising that Bayliss, as a victim in that sense, would have those kind of explorations, if you want to call them that.
I felt it was interesting the way Frank was written, where he was talking about where Bayliss was. I thought maybe it was a little bit out of character, sort of like just questionable, but sort of like still within the realms of credibility for that character, because it's like whatever is like the convention, I suppose, because he is an SJ. It's like he's got his when in Rome, do as the Romans do attitude on him.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is even when he acts what could be called unpredictably, he does it in a predictable way. That's the kind of way I look at it anyways. It's like he still stays true to his temperament even when he does things that seem out of character for him.
Yeah. But then Frank is like, he's more... I don't care what the convention is, I just don't want to see two guys dancing together.
Yeah, he's just being honest.
Yeah.
He's like, this is what aesthetically is pleasing or not pleasing to me.
How about the fact that they can hear each other when they're stood about 12 feet apart in a noisy club?
Yeah, Morgan actually said when Bayliss was reading the guy his Miranda rights on the way out, he's like, he might want to wait till he's out of the club because his lawyer's going to say he couldn't hear the Miranda because the club was too noisy.
I mean, that was a very quiet club. I mean, the way, I mean, noise levels now, I mean, they might be a bit more realistic.
Yeah.
Where if you want it quiet, you have to go into the VIP area.
I was going to say before I forgot about it, though, when you talked about the foul zone subplot, I'd say two things about that. One, it was sort of an introduction, even though they mentioned it before. It's sort of, it wasn't intended to be a really meaty scene. It was just kind of, and I sort of liked the interplay, the reaction, the jealousy of him and the other guy that was with his ex, and I thought she was pretty believable. And I'm like,
yeah, believable actress, yes.
And when it comes to the typological analysis, it didn't take me long to be like, here's a typical relationship of two artisans who, kind of probably burned brightly and then flamed out. That's sort of a paraphrase, because there was something Kersey said, and please understand me too, there was something similar to that when he talked about artist-artisan relationships.
I think part of it is like all this stuff with the child custody thing, and I'm like, I've seen similar storyline before with the private life and maybe other things, and I'm just sort of bored of it.
No, it's fair enough. I mean,
but that's just like a personal thing. Like, if you've seen the same storyline a lot, and it's like, enough already.
It wasn't on screen long enough really to get bored of it. And one thing that, Morris said he thought they tried to put too much in the episode. I like episodes where it feels like there's a lot of different things going on. So I didn't have a problem with that at all. I liked the pacing of it. And I'm not trying to say those particular scenes were exciting in any way, but I didn't find them boring either. They just were, they happened. I chuckled at the interplay between them, because you can kind of see, you have this little snippet into their relationship, and you can see, why they're divorced in terms of the interactions they have with each other. Because you're like, obviously, every time they try to talk, stuff like this happens. So at one point, when they got together in the first place, they probably were basically in denial, because it was just sort of, we're going off the infatuation or the physical aspect of the relationship. We have a lot in common, so here we go. But then at some point they realized every time they tried to talk about anything serious, it would devolve into a fight. And so you see that happening in the brief scenes that they had together. And you can see some of the issues that they obviously had.
Right, so
you're right, it's not a new concept at all, but I thought it was well done for what it was.
Right. Now, there is somebody there's somebody who looks like the actor that was playing the owner of the gay bar. And that is
Gallagher is that actor's name.
Yeah, and he also looks like he also resembles. Let's get
see how many different ways you can say that before you find the picture.
Well, he resembles this guy. Do you know who that is?
No, tell me.
That Nick Gillespie is a libertarian. I think maybe editor of Reason magazine. So there's your obscure libertarian reference there, folks. But
well, it's funny you talk about lookalikes for Peter Geller, because when I saw this episode again, I looked up what else he had done because he looked familiar. I was trying to think what else I had seen him in.
More the hair.
And looking at his list, I figured out who it was. It is in the movie Mr. Deeds. He plays Chuck. And Mr. Deeds, I know, you know, anybody who's watching this is dying to do this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, if you want to find a character that's very similar to me in a movie, Adam Sandler's version of Mr. Deeds is pretty close. And not just because he's in love with Winona Ryder. That's not the only reason.
Is she the one who, like, confirmed her SP credentials by going off the rails a little bit?
If you mean when she was caught shoplifting, yes, that just made her even hotter to me. I already loved her, and that just, you know, she went up in the stratosphere after that. You know.
That didn't. Not only did that put it over the top, she was already over the top. Like I said, stratosphere.
Yeah, right. Stratosphere. Yeah, because I got a crush on her in Beetlejuice, and I went full out in love with her when I saw the movie Mermaids, and then it was just, you know, everything from then on that she was in that I saw. I haven't seen everything she's done, but.
Right, so I still thought, but I think it's because of the other episodes that they've done. I'd still give it about a 5. I mean, oh yes, that's what I wanted to say about Georgia Ray. I thought, but you see, she's not an NT. See, I thought she might have said, or even a smarter SP, she might have said, yeah, I didn't have a videotape, but I have got this audio tape of you saying in the back of my car that you killed my brother.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things. You know, you talk about a story where it's like kind of disappointing that part, and Morgan agrees with me, but not entirely for the same reasons. There's elements of that are kind of a letdown to me, and but without spoiling anything, 2 episodes from now is my favorite episode of the season, and because just about everything in it is good, including the part of the story that involves Georgia Ray. So there will be high points in the story.
What I personally think, I think the actress that plays Georgia Ray is very well cast. I think she's very well cast.
I can't disagree with that, but at the same time, I think the character is a little bit too melodramatic. So
yeah, but I do like the actress. I like the power that she has.
For what it is, it's just that I'm not too into that.
Yeah. I just think she's very effective at playing like a criminal with a bit of an edge to them, but a better written. So I see a lot of potential in that. If the character was written differently, this could have been like a really effective performance if it was written a little bit better.
Yeah, and Morgan's comments while watching this again were like, he said basically Kellerman was, you know, the only one making sense in the first part where he said, you know, you shouldn't tell Stivers because she can't handle it. You know, Morgan out loud says, he's right. He can't. And also at the point where, you know, the others are like, when they had the meeting outside, you know, where they drive the cars out, he said the other, you know, Kellerman's the only one who's like actually being, can't remember the word he used, but basically like proactive.
Yeah.
And the other two are just sort of being like, we don't like this, fix it, wah.
You know, before, you know, 1 or 2 episodes ago, I said that Kellerman was written better and he confided in Juliana. And I said before then he was a bit of a dick. Now he seems to be back into dick mode.
But he can be more effective when he's in dick mode, though. That's the thing, is that you know, that's the thing is with ESTP, sometimes that's when they're at their best, the most effective. But yeah, they can still put off a lot of people.
So it's like maybe the writer, it's trying to get that right balance between, like, yes, the character's in dick mode, but it's like, don't make him too objectionable. Let's still get some redeeming features or lines or moments in the scene for him, because obviously he's under pressure, and he's been under pressure before with the investigation. So you can sort of see how a series is nearing its end, you know, when things are coming up again that have been previously explored. And even though, like, he's not a character that was in at the start, he was like, he only came in the middle, that these, because you said before that with season 6, do you some of your favorite episodes are in season 6, but do you think things start repeating? What do you think is the reason for some of the poorer episodes?
I don't think a lot of my favorite episodes are in season 6. Only a couple of them.
Okay.
Most of my favorites are earlier than that.
Do you think the reason why, though, that the episodes that you don't like in season 6 are not so good, is it because they're treading old ground, or they're just not good in themselves? Or
no, well, we've discussed this before, but honestly, I think there was a little bit too much focus on the new characters and not as much screen time for some of the veterans. And the better episodes are usually the ones that focus on the veteran characters. You know, it's not even that I dislike all the new characters. In fact, really, I got no problem with Ballard, and I like Bertie quite a bit. I was glad they decided to make him a regular after this first, because I think he's another character that has layers to him and isn't so easily pigeonholed as being.
Yes, I think, as you said with Bolander, I think he's a sort of more interesting SJ.
Yeah. So with him, you get an opportunity to explore, sort of, like I said before, the other side of SJ-ness, where you have Bayliss on the one hand, and you have G. You know, you have Bertie, who's not exactly like either one of them. So, you know, I think that's a good thing to explore there.
I think the way I would write an SJ character is to explore the things that are sort of like, that go beyond their SJ-ness. Like the interesting bits beyond that, and those are the bits that make them interesting, that will keep the audience off balance. Like, still things that are still consistent. You don't want to write someone who's 100% totally SJ unless you're doing a comedy character. But just the little.
That's the thing, is you can have that, and as long as it's realistic and not. I don't know what to say. That's not cheesy, you know. It's not done in a way where you're just like, this is super stereotype guy. You're just like, this is a realistic character. You know, then it works.
Yeah, I mean, it works with like G. He's like super SJ. It's like we like him, but part of that is the performance as well. And
yeah, and that's why I think I think it's great when they have contrasting characters of the same type. So we talked before about G and Gaffney both being ESTJs, but being obviously very different versions of the ESTJ in terms of they have the same temperament and personality, but they have different backgrounds and different work ethics, different you know, kind of personal views of people.
And we could argue,
so anytime you have those situations where you can contrast and compare the two characters of the same type and see both what they have in common and what makes them different, it's always good to see that.
Jeff, you mentioned in your very good video, he has a very good video out there, folks, with Celebach. What's it called again, Jeff?
I think it was just called Fat Bozo and Celebach.
Right. Well, the reason I bring this up, and the reason why I did a slight interruption there, and I sort of backed out of it and let Jeff continue, was that Jeff mentioned in that, because we were talking now about two characters of the same type, and you mentioned something briefly in that hangout about the difference between temperament and character. And how temperament isn't the whole thing, whereas character is the whole. So maybe could it be said that it's just that G and the guy who was stealing food, Gaffney, and they're the same temperament, but they have different character. So through the lens of Kersey, how would you like explain that difference between temperament and character, giving those two as an example? Because they are the same type but different.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this before when we had, you know, the episodes that featured them more. But, you know, obviously the attitudes are different. You know, G is probably more compassionate, more less concerned with. Well, I don't know. It's tough for me to frame it because it's like they both concerned with their image, but G actually has like moral dilemmas.
Yeah.
Based on that, like you know, you can tell in him that when those things come into conflict, like his loyalty to being a cop, as well as his views on himself as a member of Black community, as well as his wanting to move up within the ranks, but also and respecting authority, but yet having disdain for some of the attitudes of the people that are above him, as well as wanting to support and respect the people working under him. Whereas Gaffney, you can see, is much more focused on that. You know, I'm concerned about my track, you know, and moving the way I want to go. And I've got, you know, I got much more closed-minded. You know, G can come off that way at times. He can be focused on a particular thing, but in general, like somebody comes to him and says, you know, I want to talk about whatever. You get the feeling he'll consider it a little bit more than Gaffney would. You know, and it's not just in the view of, you know, how is this going to affect me? He's thinking about more than himself.
The reason I asked this is because, like, Kersey mentions on the book, please understand me too, it says temperament, character, intelligence. What does he mean by character? Because I can't find the character bit in the book. What does he mean by character?
I think it's in there somewhere. I can't quote the page for you because I haven't memorized it or anything, but I'm pretty sure there was at least brief stuff about character in there.
So what does it mean? So for an example, so is it like, is it something that's too hard to say when it's like, so the character of G is all of that includes his temperament but goes beyond his temperament?
Well, I mean, I think it's the difference in the perception of the audience is going to see G as a good guy and Gaffney as a bad guy, and that's a black and white oversimplification. But in general, it makes sense because
that's how I would say it.
Like the times where G acts like a jerk, you understand why. You understand his purpose. You might think, okay, well, maybe he flew off the handle a little too quickly on this, or maybe he's not listening enough on that. But you can see flaws in it, but you can see where he's going with it. You're not, you know, you're thinking, okay, you know, yeah, he can be aggravating at times, but but I think probably most people in the audience, if not everybody, you would say, would you rather have G as a boss or Gaffney as a boss? The only people that are going to choose Gaffney are going to be probably people that are like racist or whatever, you know, that they're like, I'm not going to work for a black guy, you know.
Or people who think he's not the brightest, I could fool him. Get away with some scams.
Right. If they think that somehow, well, you know, I can get away with stuff, or he's not going to be as attentive, you know. So there could be other reasons, but for the most part, if you're just talking about somebody that you actually respect as a boss, then, you know, G is more respectable. So that aspect of Guardian stuff he has higher level of than Gaffney does, is that respectability thing.
Yeah.
And Gaffney may think he has it because he's like, I'm captain, so I'm above him, so I'm more respectable than he is. But obviously, the difference between those is where the character is. Yeah. Is where it's not just about rank and position; it's about what your morals are and what you do with your position. Good. So hopefully that was a answer your question.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
There you go. If people stick around, they stick around to the end, they get the good typology bit. But there's probably a few people out there who stick around to the end of these hangouts.
I hope so, because you know we try to keep it a little tight. We're not doing, you know, 3 hours on each episode or anything.
Yeah.
But I do want to say about this one, you know, sort of my overall impression that I know what comes after this, of course, when it comes to both Bayliss and, well, everybody, because I've seen it already. I didn't have a problem with them exploring sort of Bayliss continuing to sort of consider philosophically and even, you know, with his actions, you know, other sexuality type stuff or things like that. That in itself, I don't have a problem with. The direction it kind of goes in, it feels like, and I don't know how much of this was network influence, but it feels like it was a combination of too much and too little in terms of what they do with the Bayliss character bothers me for different reasons than it might be on the surface. You know, there could be somebody that was just, like I said, if they're just straight up, like, if they really are homophobic and they see this and they know Bayliss was like, you know, the normal guy. If their reaction is kind of like Higby and they're like, don't turn Bayliss into a corn muffin. You know, that's one reaction to that. But my reaction was different. Is just, my view is it consistent with the character in terms of him exploring these things? And on the surface level, I would say yes, but later on it gets a little bit weird. And yet, if they were going to do that, then they should have explored it more in depth. Instead, they just sort of touch on it and make it weird and then back away from it. So it's like, it's one of those things in the last couple of seasons that's unsatisfying that they do. But this episode itself, I thought was actually pretty well done. And I like the fact that we had the killer who will only give the confession after Bayliss compliments him, you know, like admits he's attracted to him, whatever. Because you have that kind of is old school homicide to me, because you have that thing about they focused a lot on what do the detectives need to do to get that confession, no matter how, outlandish or I'm trying to think of the word, unconventional that it may be. You know, there's different tactics that they use, and we see that right from the very beginning in the first episode with the different approaches they use depending on the suspect. And there's even, Pemberton is sort of schooling Bayliss at the beginning on how to talk to a suspect in a way that gets the confession. So I liked that aspect of it in terms of we show Bayliss is still thinking in this situation as a detective, and how do I get this guy to confess? So you have that kind of double layer thing there where you have him thinking about these things about homosexuality, but he's also still trying to do his duty and close the case. So he does it in a way that's effective. So I like Pemberton just sort of laughing about it too. So that aspect I thought was interesting. And like I said, the Georgia Ray part, it's kind of, I don't have a problem with it being in there. Like, it's there. It doesn't really advance anything in particular, but it just sort of, I didn't mind it. So it just, the pacing was good. This is just one of those episodes where there's ideas kind of being floated out there, but there's not a lot of, exciting stuff or anything that just makes me have deep emotions about anything. So there's not a whole lot of super compelling stuff, but there's interesting things. So anyway, was there anything else you wanted to say about it?
Yeah, it all depends on how future episodes develop as to how convincing this episode is with, like, Bayliss' changing sexual proclivities, things like that.
Yeah, well, I'd say, like I said, without spoiling anything, the future is a little bit of a letdown in my view. But, obviously I'll let you draw your own conclusions. But all right, so you gave it a 5. I will give it a 7 for an average of 6. And join us next week for another sort of thought-provoking episode entitled Sins of the Father.
Oh, there's probably been so many episodes called that in lots of different series. So,
Could be, yeah.
Yep. Now, here we go, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sins of the Father, Ben. That's it. Remember that.